The Raila swearing is back with us. This time it looks a lot more serious than before. And it looks like now we must deal with the consequences. But before we look at the consequences, top of which I'm inviting Kenyans to begin thinking about a Raila presidency as a consequence of this swearing in. In other words, from Uhuru Park to Statehouse. But before that, why am I convinced this time the swearing in will go on? One, and I think more serious, is that the president has now named in his cabinet with all the assistant ministers and the political ambassadors. Some people had hoped that the president had kept some vacancies for NASA. And with this complete cabinet, it would appear either if there were talks, they have collapsed, or there never were talks, and that Uhuru is confident that he can rule this country without bothering about Raila and his swearing. The other reason why this swearing seems set to take place is the unveiling of what Orengo calls the real results from the servers. In other words, you declare the results, naturally you swear somebody in. So Orengo and his team have declared that Raila won the elections of 8th of August 2017. And naturally, therefore, on the 30th of January this month, they are going to swear in Raila. There's also in the air the feeling that this time round, this swearing is going to take place. But more critically is that the NASA principles seem to have been held hostage by their followers. That their hardliners in NASA who will ensure that Raila is sworn in. Top of this is Miguna, David Ndii, and Norman Magaya. But more critically are the masses who will hear nothing. In the words of Joho, the vehicle they are traveling in to 30th of January for the swearing has no brakes, has no reverse gear, and the windows are tinted. And this is what the common man on the NASA side seems to be saying. Kalonzo Musyoka attempted to talk about dialogue. He was almost shouted down in Machakos. He tried the same in Mombasa. Again, the mood was such that the common man, the rank and file of NASA will hear none of that issue of dialogue. And therefore, I'm convinced more than ever before that whether they like it or not, the NASA principals will have to live up to the swearing on the 30th of October. And now to the consequences, which I say is what we must deal with. First, if the past is anything to go by, there will be disruption of business if the government does move in to stop this swearing. I urge the government that if Raila must be sworn in, let him be sworn in, don't interrupt, don't interfere, because to do so is to invite anarchy as we have seen in the past. So the consequences will begin with disruption of business, and yet this country is hurting. There is no money in this country. There's no business going on. We can't afford that again. Secondly, there will be loss of life, injuries, and loss of property. We can avoid that by either doing something to stop this swearing, and that looks a little too late, or by letting the swearing go on. But the most serious consequence of this swearing in, the way I see it, and I'm inviting Kenyans to look at it, is that Raila can indeed, contrary to what many people think from the Jubilee side, take over power after being sworn in. How? If Raila were to summon 1 million people, as they say, if you were to bring 500,000 people, if you were to succeed to bring even 200,000 men and women to the capital city of Kenya, you can cause the kind of trouble, the kind of anarchy that can very easily allow somebody to take state power. It has happened elsewhere. We saw what happened at the Tahrir Square in Egypt. People can really cause havoc when they are in numbers. However, and this is good for the side of Jubilee, NASA doesn't have the strategy to mobilize 1 million people. So Jubilee can sit pretty. Secondly, I'm sure the NASA principals do not want this swearing in. I can look at Raila in the eyes and tell him, Raila, you don't want to be sworn in, except you are afraid of telling your followers as much. Indeed, The other three principles have nothing to do with this swearing, except again, they can't say it in public. So I suspect something, and I'm inviting the NASA principal to argue with me. They might be very happy if they are put under house arrest, so that they get the excuse they need not to attend the swearing in. If indeed I'm wrong, what are they going to do to ensure that nobody puts them under house arrest? Whatever happens for me, from where I stand for peace in this country. If the swearing in can bring peace, I'm for that swearing. If the swearing in will not bring peace, I'm not for that swearing in. And I'm sure I speak for a majority of Kenyans who want peace for themselves and tranquility for the sake of their children.